Today, we're about to explore 5 shocking cases where these rich people got eaten alive by animals. From a Texas oil investor mauled near a lion's kill to a shipping magnate killed by his own tiger. But first, we start in South Africa, where a routine trophy hunt would end in tragedy when one man walked into the wrong clearing at the wrong time. September 12, 2015 brought clear skies and moderate temperatures to the private concession bordering Kruger National Park in South Africa. The dry season had left the landscape golden and dusty, with visibility extending for miles across the savanna. The air carried the faint scent of dry grass and red earth, broken occasionally by the distant barking of baboons somewhere deeper in the bush. Richard Caldwell, a 61-year-old oil investor from Texas, had built his fortune through strategic investments in petroleum extraction operations across the southern United States. His wealth had afforded him a lifestyle most could only dream of, including regular expeditions to Africa where he paid premium prices for exclusive hunting experiences. This particular trip marked his 7th visit to southern Africa. Caldwell had arrived at the private reserve 3 days earlier, accompanied by 2 experienced professional guides who specialized in dangerous game tracking. The group had been pursuing a wounded buffalo through dense vegetation, following a blood trail that stretched for nearly 2 miles through tall grass and acacia thickets. As the afternoon sun began its descent, the tracking party noticed vultures circling overhead. Caldwell immediately assumed the buffalo had finally succumbed to its injuries and collapsed somewhere ahead. Despite the guide's urging caution, he insisted on investigating on foot, eager to claim his trophy before scavengers could damage it. The group moved through the tall grass toward the vultures. The guides maintained their rifles at the ready, scanning the surroundings carefully as they pushed through the final stretch of vegetation, and discovered something entirely different from what they had expected. A freshly killed impala lay in a small clearing, its body still warm and bleeding. Surrounding the carcass, partially concealed in the brush, was a pride of African lions that had been feeding quietly when the human intrusion interrupted their meal. The metallic scent of fresh blood hung in the still air, and low warning growls could already be heard from the shadows between the bushes. Before the guides could physically pull Caldwell backward, a lioness defending the kill site launched herself forward from less than 15 meters away. The female lion, weighing roughly 300 pounds, covered the distance in seconds. Her protective instincts had been triggered by the sudden appearance of threats near her food source. African lions are apex predators capable of taking down prey many times their own size. Their jaws can exert tremendous crushing pressure capable of piercing thick hide and bone, and their retractable claws can grow up to 1.5 inches in length. When defending a fresh kill, they become particularly aggressive, viewing any approaching animal as competition for their hard-won meal. A lion at a kill is operating on pure instinct. There is no hesitation, no warning, and no negotiation. The lioness struck Caldwell with devastating force, her front paws connecting with his chest and shoulders, sending him crashing backward into the dirt. The impact was enormous, a dull, heavy thud that echoed across the clearing. Before the guides could react, the predator's jaws clamped down across Caldwell's shoulder and neck. One guide fired a shot into the dirt beside the lioness, but she had already established her grip. The second guide attempted to use his rifle to drive the animal away, but the speed and ferocity of the attack made intervention nearly impossible without risking hitting Caldwell himself. The lioness shook Caldwell violently, her powerful neck muscles whipping his body from side to side. The guides fired additional shots near the lion to startle it without causing a fatal wound. The combination of gunfire and shouting finally caused the lioness to release her grip and retreat toward the rest of the pride. Caldwell lay motionless on the ground, his body bearing massive trauma. The guides immediately radioed for emergency medical evacuation while attempting to stabilize him. A helicopter arrived within 40 minutes, but Caldwell had already lost consciousness from blood loss and shock. Medical personnel worked frantically during the flight, but the injuries were too severe. Caldwell was pronounced dead before reaching the nearest medical facility. The post-incident investigation revealed that the group had violated several safety protocols by approaching an unknown situation without proper reconnaissance and by allowing a client to lead, rather than experienced trackers. Richard Caldwell's death began with a wounded animal and a moment of impatience near a predator's kill. But sometimes the danger isn't hidden in tall grass or concealed behind brush. Sometimes the threat is visible from the beginning, and someone still chooses to step closer. It was July 4th, 2016 dawned with spectacular weather across the Serengeti in Tanzania. The morning air was crisp and clear, with temperatures in the low 70s, and not a cloud visible in the brilliant blue sky. The dry season had transformed the landscape into an endless expanse of golden grassland, broken only by scattered kopjes, ancient granite outcroppings that jutted from the plains like islands rising from a sea of grass. It was exactly the kind of morning that makes a $12,000 per person price tag feel entirely justified. Victoria Langford, a 32-year-old property investor from London, had accumulated substantial wealth through strategic real estate acquisitions across the United Kingdom. Her portfolio included commercial properties in prime locations, generating passive income that allowed her to travel extensively. This particular safari package had cost nearly $12,000 per person, promising luxury accommodations and exclusive game viewing experiences. Langford had arrived at the park 4 days earlier as part of a small group tour. She had spent her time photographing elephants, giraffes, and various antelope species, but had grown increasingly frustrated with the mandatory distance requirements enforced by the guides. She had expressed multiple times that photos from the required safe distances lacked the dramatic impact she wanted for her social media accounts. On the afternoon of July 4th, the safari vehicle stopped approximately 80 meters from a pride of African lions resting in tall grass near a seasonal waterhole. The guide explained that the pride consisted of 2 adult males, several females, and multiple cubs, and emphasized that everyone must remain inside the vehicle at all times. The group spent nearly 20 minutes photographing the pride from the safety of the Land Cruiser. Most of the lions appeared to be sleeping, their bodies sprawled in the shade of scattered acacia trees, tails flicking lazily at flies. The scene looked almost peaceful, the kind of stillness that could easily make an inexperienced observer forget what they were looking at. The guide was occupied answering questions from other tourists, his attention divided among the 6 passengers. Langford quietly opened the rear door of the vehicle and stepped out onto the dusty ground. She moved slowly and deliberately, keeping her eyes on the distant lions as she walked several meters from the Land Cruiser, her phone already positioned for a selfie with the pride visible in the background. What Langford failed to notice was that one of the younger male lions, approximately 3 years old and weighing roughly 300 pounds, had been lying in grass tall enough to completely conceal his body. His position placed him much closer to the tourists than anyone realized. The moment Langford began walking, the young male's predatory instincts activated. Lions are hardwired to respond to movement, particularly when an animal separates itself from a group. In the wild, an animal that breaks from the herd is almost always vulnerable, injured, sick, or disoriented. To a lion, that separation is a signal refined over millions of years of evolution. The lion rose silently from his concealed position and began stalking toward Langford from behind, his body low to the ground and his movements fluid and deliberate. By the time the guide noticed what was happening, the lion had already closed more than half the distance. His shouted warnings only caused Langford to turn around, putting her in direct eye contact with the approaching predator. Lions typically hunt by stalking close before launching a final explosive charge. They can accelerate from a standstill to 35 miles per hour in just a few seconds, covering short distances faster than any human can react. Their strategy relies on surprise and overwhelming physical force. The young male charged the final 20 meters in less than 3 seconds. Langford attempted to run back toward the vehicle, but the predator was on her before she managed 2 steps. The lion's front paws struck her back with tremendous force, driving her face first into the ground. The guide slammed the vehicle into gear and accelerated toward the lion while leaning on the horn, as other tourists screamed and banged on the sides of the Land Cruiser. The noise and commotion caused the young male to pause momentarily, but he maintained his position over Langford's body. The guide continued driving directly at the lion, closing the distance while shouting through the open window. The combination of the approaching vehicle and sustained human noise finally triggered the lion's retreat instinct. The predator released Langford and trotted back toward the pride. The guide and another tourist pulled Langford back into the vehicle. She had sustained massive injuries to her back, shoulders, and neck from the lion's claws and initial bite. The guide immediately radioed for emergency evacuation while applying pressure to the worst of the wounds. A medical helicopter arrived within 35 minutes, landing in a clearing several hundred meters from the attack site. Langford remained conscious, but was going into shock from blood loss and trauma. Medical personnel stabilized her during the flight to the nearest trauma center. Despite extensive surgical intervention, Langford died from her injuries approximately 6 hours after the attack. Extreme blood loss and trauma to vital structures proved too severe to overcome. The investigation placed full responsibility on Langford for violating clearly stated safety regulations. The guide was cleared of any wrongdoing, though the safari company implemented additional physical barriers on all vehicles to prevent passengers from opening doors during game viewing. Victoria Langford stepped out of the safety of a vehicle for a photograph and found herself face to face with a predator that had been watching her the entire time. But not every fatal encounter with a powerful animal happens in the wild. Sometimes the danger is invited into a home, where familiarity can create a dangerous illusion of control. On March 18, 2018 brought warm, humid weather to Palm Beach County, Florida. Temperatures reached the mid-80s by afternoon, with thick clouds building inland as they typically did during spring. The subtropical climate created perfect conditions for the exotic reptiles housed in climate-controlled facilities that dotted the region's wealthier estates, where private collections of rare and dangerous animals had become a peculiar status symbol among the ultra-wealthy. Marcus LeBlanc, a 49-year-old hedge fund manager, had built his fortune through aggressive investment strategies in emerging markets and technology startups. His success had allowed him to pursue unusual hobbies, including a private reptile collection, housed in a specially constructed building on his waterfront estate. The facility featured individual climate zones, automated monitoring systems, and security measures that rivaled those of professional zoological institutions. LeBlanc had been collecting exotic reptiles for nearly 15 years, gradually acquiring more dangerous specimens as his expertise grew. His collection included venomous snakes, large monitor lizards, and several constrictor species. The crown jewel was a 17-foot reticulated python, one of the longest snake species in the world. Reticulated pythons are native to Southeast Asia and known for their powerful constricting ability. These ambush predators feed on mammals ranging from rats to small deer, killing by wrapping their muscular bodies around prey and tightening their coils each time the victim exhales, eventually causing cardiac arrest through oxygen deprivation. LeBlanc typically employed professional handlers during feeding sessions for his largest snakes. The protocols required 2 people to be present whenever the reticulated python was fed, one managing the snake, the other presenting food using long tongs. On the evening of March 18th, LeBlanc arrived at his reptile facility after the handlers had left for the day. Delayed by a business meeting, he had missed the scheduled feeding time. Rather than waiting until the next day, LeBlanc decided to feed the snake himself. He entered the python's enclosure, a large custom-built space with reinforced glass walls and a secure locking mechanism. LeBlanc carried a thawed rabbit and a pair of long feeding tongs, standard equipment for large constrictors. As LeBlanc extended the rabbit toward the python, the snake struck with lightning-fast reflexes. The python struck the rabbit, missed, and latched onto LeBlanc's arm with its teeth, immediately wrapping coils around him almost instantly. Constrictor snakes possess an instinctive response that causes them to tighten their grip whenever they detect movement or struggle. Once the coiling reflex is triggered, the snake continues applying pressure with each movement it detects. The more the victim struggles, the tighter the constriction becomes. Alone, escape becomes almost impossible. LeBlanc attempted to use his free hand to unwrap the coils, but this only caused the snake to extend its body further, wrapping around his torso. Within seconds, the 17-foot python had established a grip encompassing LeBlanc's arm, chest, and neck. The pressure was immediate and overwhelming. LeBlanc's ribs began to compress, making it difficult to draw breath. He attempted to reach the emergency call button near the enclosure entrance, but the python's weight and constricting force made movement nearly impossible. As his struggles weakened, the python continued to tighten. The snake was simply following millions of years of evolutionary programming, responding to the heat and movement of what it perceived as prey. Each shallow breath LeBlanc managed allowed the coils to tighten further, leaving less room on the next attempt. LeBlanc lost consciousness within approximately 4 minutes. The python maintained its grip for an extended period, as is typical when securing large prey, and continued to hold its position even after LeBlanc's heart stopped. The following morning, professional handlers arriving for their scheduled shift discovered LeBlanc's body still wrapped in the python's coils. It took 3 experienced handlers nearly 30 minutes to safely remove the snake and extract the body from the enclosure. The medical examination confirmed death by asphyxiation due to thoracic compression, with multiple rib fractures and severe internal injuries consistent with constrictor attack. The timeline suggested LeBlanc had been dead for approximately 10 to 12 hours. The investigation found that LeBlanc had violated his own safety protocols by entering the enclosure alone. Security camera footage confirmed no one else had been present during the incident. The reticulated python was seized by wildlife authorities and relocated to a licensed reptile sanctuary. LeBlanc's entire collection was evaluated, and several specimens were found to be held in violation of local exotic animal regulations. The collection was dispersed among licensed facilities and educational institutions. Marcus LeBlanc had spent years working around dangerous animals and believed he understood the risks. But experience can sometimes create the very confidence that leads someone to ignore their own safety rules. In the next case, the danger wasn't inside an enclosure. It was part of the natural environment, and someone had grown far too comfortable living beside it. It was November 9th, 2014, brought oppressive heat and humidity to the floodplain wetlands near Kakadu National Park in Australia's Northern Territory. Temperatures had reached 95 degrees by late afternoon, with the approaching wet season leaving the tidal river system swollen with recent rainfall. The air was thick and still, carrying the smell of mud and vegetation that characterizes the region's transitional season, that uncomfortable stretch of weeks when the heat becomes almost unbearable, but the rains have not yet arrived to break it. Gregory Halstead, a 54-year-old mining executive, had accumulated substantial wealth through leadership positions in several major mineral extraction operations across Australia. His success had allowed him to purchase a luxury property along a tidal river system connected to the wetlands, featuring a private dock with stunning views of the surrounding wilderness. Halstead had owned the property for approximately 3 years, using it as a weekend retreat. The area was well known for its large population of saltwater crocodiles, and warning signs had been installed along the riverbank by wildlife authorities, clearly stating the danger and advising against entering the water. The Northern Territory's Wildlife Management Agency maintained records of multiple fatal attacks in the region over the previous decade. Despite these warnings, Halstead had developed a habit of cooling off in the river during hot evenings. He had done so dozens of times without incident, creating a false sense of security. Halstead had convinced himself that the crocodiles in his section of the river were either absent or accustomed to his presence, reasoning that collapses entirely when measured against the behavior of saltwater crocodiles, which are patient, observant, and entirely indifferent to human assumptions. Saltwater crocodiles are among the most dangerous predators on Earth. These massive reptiles can grow to lengths exceeding 20 feet and weights of over 2,000 pounds. They are ambush hunters that can remain motionless in water for hours, and their bite force exceeds 3,700 pounds per square inch, the strongest of any living animal. On the evening of November 9th, Halstead returned to his property after a particularly stressful week. The heat was unbearable, and the air conditioning was malfunctioning, so he headed down to the dock just after sunset, around 7:30 p.m., a particularly dangerous time, as saltwater crocodiles are most active during twilight hours and after dark. He waited out until he was waist-deep approximately 10 feet from the dock. The water was warm and murky, with visibility extending only a few inches below the surface. What Halstead could not see was the saltwater crocodile positioned motionless in deeper water nearby, estimated at over 14 feet in length and 1,200 pounds. Crocodiles are known to learn the patterns of potential prey, returning to locations where animals regularly enter the water. The attack came without warning. The crocodile launched itself upward from below the surface in an explosive vertical strike, its jaws clamping down on Halstead's torso with devastating force. The predator started dragging Halstead into a deeper section of the water before immediately spinning its body, a behavior known as the death roll, to disorient prey, tear flesh, and drag victims underwater. Halstead was pulled beneath the surface within seconds. The crocodile maintained its grip while continuing to roll, causing catastrophic injuries to his torso and limbs. The murky water turned dark with blood. A neighbor walking along the riverbank approximately 200 meters away heard the disturbance, a brief cry followed by a heavy splash that carried clearly through the still evening air. By the time they reached a vantage point near Halstead's dock, there was no sign of him, only ripples spreading outward across the otherwise calm water. Emergency services were contacted immediately, and police and wildlife rangers arrived within 20 minutes. The search continued through the night using spotlights and boats, but the murky water and extensive mangrove systems made the effort extremely difficult. 3 days later, Halstead's remains were discovered approximately 800 meters downstream, cached underwater beneath a submerged log. Typical behavior for saltwater crocodiles that store large prey to feed on over several days. Wildlife rangers tracked and captured a large male crocodile matching the estimated size of the attacker. Examination confirmed it had recently fed on a large mammal, and following standard protocols for crocodiles involved in fatal attacks on humans, the animal was euthanized. The investigation revealed that Halstead had been repeatedly warned by neighbors and local authorities about the danger of entering the water. Property records showed that warning signs had been installed on his dock by the previous owner, though Halstead had removed them at some point. Gregory Halstead had entered that river many times before without consequence. The routine had become familiar, almost ordinary, until the evening when the river's most powerful predator finally acted. But sometimes the most dangerous assumption of all is believing that a wild predator can truly be controlled. May 27th, 2013 brought pleasant spring weather to the rural countryside outside Odessa, Ukraine. Temperatures were mild, reaching the low 70s by evening, with clear skies and a gentle breeze. The agricultural landscape was lush and green, with fields of wheat and sunflowers stretching to the horizon, and the smell of new growth drifting across the estate's grounds. Anton Volkov, a 46-year-old shipping magnate, had built his fortune through strategic control of cargo transport operations across the Black Sea region. His business empire included a fleet of commercial vessels and port facilities that generated enormous revenue. This wealth had allowed Volkov to indulge in extravagant displays of status, including the construction of a private menagerie on his countryside estate. The property sprawled across nearly 200 acres, featuring a main residence, guest houses, and reinforced enclosures housing exotic animals. Volkov's collection included rare birds, several species of large cats, and other impressive specimens acquired through both legal and questionable channels. The centerpiece was a male Siberian tiger, one of the largest and most powerful predators on Earth. Siberian tigers can weigh up to 660 pounds and measure over 10 feet in length. These apex predators possess retractable claws up to 4 inches long and canine teeth exceeding 3 inches, capable of taking down prey as large as adult bears through stealth, explosive speed, and devastating bite force. Volkov had acquired the tiger 3 years earlier when it was still a juvenile. As the animal matured, professional handlers had repeatedly warned him about the increasing danger it posed, implementing strict protocols requiring multiple handlers during any interaction and absolutely forbidding anyone from entering the enclosure alone. On the evening of May 27th, Volkov was hosting a party for approximately 30 guests, including business associates and local officials. As the night progressed and alcohol flowed freely, Volkov began leading groups of guests on tours of his menagerie, taking particular pride in showing off the tiger, which he had named Khan. Around 11 p.m., Volkov led 6 guests to the tiger enclosure. The massive cat was pacing along the fence line, displaying the restless behavior typical of large predators in captivity. Several guests commented on the animal's impressive size and obvious power. Others seemed uneasy. One reportedly stepped back from the fence when the tiger turned and stared directly at the group. Volkov, heavily intoxicated and eager to impress, announced that he would demonstrate his special relationship with the tiger. Despite protests from some guests, he retrieved raw meat from a nearby storage facility and approached the enclosure gate. The tiger enclosure featured double gate security, requiring passage through an outer gate before accessing the inner gate leading to the main habitat, a design intended to prevent escape if a gate was accidentally left open. Volkov unlocked both and entered carrying approximately 10 pounds of raw beef. Initially, the tiger approached cautiously, focusing on the meat. Volkov tossed several pieces toward the animal, which the tiger consumed quickly. Emboldened, Volkov moved deeper into the enclosure, throwing meat and calling out to his guests about how well-trained the animal was. What Volkov failed to understand was that tigers cannot be domesticated. Even those raised in captivity retain their predatory instincts and can be triggered by specific behaviors, including one of the most dangerous, turning one's back on a large cat, which activates their instinct to attack from behind. Volkov turned away from the tiger to address his guests, watching from outside the fence. In that single moment, the situation shifted from a feeding interaction to a predatory opportunity. The tiger's pupils dilated, its body lowered into a stalking crouch, and its focus shifted from the meat to Volkov himself. The attack happened in seconds. The tiger covered the 20 feet between them in 2 explosive bounds, its front paws striking Volkov's back with enough force to drive him face first into the ground. Before he could react, the tiger's jaws clamped down on the back of his neck, the killing technique big cats use to sever the spinal cord of prey. The guests outside began screaming. Several attempted to open the gates to help, but the tiger's aggressive posture kept them at bay. One guest called emergency services, while others searched frantically for the handler's phone numbers. The tiger maintained its grip while using its body weight to pin Volkov to the ground. Its canine teeth had penetrated deep into the tissue, causing catastrophic damage to the cervical spine and major blood vessels. Volkov's movements ceased within approximately 30 seconds of the initial strike. The tiger then began dragging Volkov's body toward a sheltered area of the enclosure, behavior consistent with wild tigers that cache kills to feed on over several days. The guests could only watch in horror as the predator disappeared into the shadows with a man they had been laughing with less than an hour before. Emergency services arrived within 15 minutes, but the situation was beyond their capability to handle. The nearest wildlife control specialists were over an hour away, and the decision was made to wait for professional handlers rather than risk additional casualties. When handlers finally arrived and sedated the tiger with tranquilizer darts, they found Volkov's body in the rear of the enclosure. He had been dead for over an hour, with injuries consistent with a typical tiger attack, massive trauma to the neck and upper spine, deep puncture wounds from canine teeth, and lacerations from the animal's claws. The investigation revealed that Volkov had violated every safety protocol established for the enclosure. Security camera footage showed him entering alone, while intoxicated, and turning his back on an active predator. The handlers were cleared of any responsibility, having repeatedly documented their warnings about his risky behavior. The tiger was seized and transferred to a wildlife sanctuary. Volkov's entire exotic animal collection was evaluated, several specimens found to be held illegally, and the animals redistributed to licensed facilities. The estate was sold to settle debts and legal claims. The incident sparked renewed debate about private ownership of dangerous exotic animals, leading to stricter regulations in the region. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.